What's the difference between a Christian and a Jew? And at what date can we even ask that question? We've talked about the fact that at the time of the writing of Paul's letters, there wasn't even a word for Christian. We find that word first recorded in the New Testament in Acts 11:26. In Antioch, the disciples were for the first time called Christians, Christianoi. At around the same time in the early 2nd century, officials of the Roman Empire seem to have recognized Christians as a distinct group. A letter sent from a provincial governor, Pliny, to the Roman Emperor Trajan in the early 2nd century, maybe 112 or 113, asks the question of whether it's right to execute those called Christians and how pardon might be granted to those accused of being Christians, who then pray or offer incense and wine to or on behalf of the Roman emperor. But that's a later story. Earlier, our evidence indicates that Romans don't know much about Christians. The Roman writer Suetonius, who writes in the late 1st or early 2nd century, talks about an event that took place in the reign of the Emperor Claudius in the mid-1st century at the time when Paul was writing his letters. We can't consider this to be a historical report, but it's still interesting. Suetonius writes, "He, Claudius, banished from Rome all the Jews who were continually making disturbances at the instigation of one Chrestus." This may refer to arguments within Judaism over Christ, that is, over an interpretation that Christ, the Anointed One, had come. But the Romans don't even know the word Christ. They confuse it with Christus. Judaism and Christianity did not necessarily part ways at an early date. Into the 2nd century and even into the 4th century, communities of Jews and Christians overlapped and interacted. We can see this, for example, in a 4th century churchman from Antioch who truly loved Paul, John Chrysostom. In one of his sermons, he bitterly complains that his congregants are celebrating Jewish festivals and even going to Jewish synagogues to confirm their oaths in the presence of the sacred Torah scrolls, or the law that was kept there. So we learn two things. First, the Romans likely did not understand Christians to be a religious group or an association with a separate name from Jews until the 2nd century. And second, even in the 4th century, some Christians were acting an awful lot like Jews, and this annoyed other Christians, John Chrysostom, for example. The lines between Christian and Jewish identity were sometimes quite porous.